We can know a lot about phonetics and phonology, and we can learn a lot of techniques and fun things to do in the classroom that we learn from textbooks or from YouTube videos, things that we've seen on TikTok or on Instagram or on mobile apps. But at the end of the day, it's not really going to help us as much or be as effective if we don't really know who our learners are. So, my role as director of our TESOL program at Webster University, I work a lot with our curriculum and I write our assessments for our TESOL students. And on those assessments, for a lot of them, they have to write what we call a description of learners. And that's really one of the first things that they have to do that frames what they need to do. So if they have to write a task or an activity, or if they're developing an assessment, we don't want them to do this in a vacuum. We want to make sure that they're developing this with a very specific group of learners in mind. So that's what this video is about, because when we are teaching pronunciation, we can't just be teaching pronunciation in a vacuum. We can't just say, I'm going to teach this skill or I want to talk about teaching stress or teaching consonants and vowels, and it's just going to work for everyone. I want us to think about how we can teach all these different skills and features, but how it's going to work for different learners. So this video is going to start to talk about how we think about who our learners are and start to break that down. And as I do that, I'm going to reflect a bit on some of my own experiences. I'll share some personal experiences and also talk about practical pronunciation. So with this, who is the audience for practical pronunciation? So who are the learners that I had in mind for practical pronunciation? And then who practical pronunciation may not be the best book for. So I hope that this video will help answer that question. Let's start with level, talking about language levels, such as beginner, intermediate, and advanced. Now, I want to talk about the Common European Framework of Reference, or CEFR. So the CEFR, Common European Framework of Reference for Languages, is a scale that is used to help describe the language level of learners. There are 6 different levels: A1, A2, B1, B2, C1, and C2. And so with this, your A level, A1 and A2, these are your basic users. And then B1 and B2, these are your independent users. And then C1 and C2 are known as proficient users. So when you've got an A1 user, these are your beginners. When you get your B1 users, this is typically your intermediate, with your B2 being that upper intermediate. And then when you get to C1, this is when you're getting into that advanced level. Now, pronunciation is important for all different levels of learners. But what will happen is what we may focus on more in terms of pronunciation may differ at different levels. And this is where different people in the field are going to vary, and there will be debates in terms of what we should and shouldn't focus on with different levels. And so I want to talk just briefly about this distinction between segmentals and suprasegmentals. And I will do 2 different videos because these topics alone will take more time to get into. But just briefly, so segmentals are consonants and vowel sounds. And then we get suprasegmentals. So suprasegmentals, supra means above or over. So these are the features that are over or above the segmentals, the consonants and vowels. So that's going to be your rhythm, your phrase stress, and intonation. Now, all learners are going to need both. But what I have found is that lower level learners tend to benefit more from a focus on segmentals, on the consonant and vowel sounds. And the reason for that is your A1 and A2 learners tend to be focused on more single word and on shorter phrases. So we're not creating extended discourse. So when we get into extended discourse, as we're going to get with this B1 through C1, it's when we are working with this B1 through C1 and we have more extended discourse, this is when we're going to be focusing on more super segmentals. And so that's where I find that this need for more focus on super segmentals. That doesn't mean that we abandon segmentals, but there's sort of a shift. So everything I see as a continuum, and as teachers, we need to make decisions of kind of where we're going in terms of things. So I like focusing a lot on super segmentals, but if I'm working with A1 and A2 learners, I don't want to take features that I love to focus on with these super segmentals and then try to take those features and work on them with my A1 and A2 learners. So with this, I really want to caution all pronunciation teachers about this kind of one size fits all approach, which you may find from some of these mobile apps that are out there, some different YouTube channels, different TikTok, Instagram videos, because we need to be thinking about who our learners are. So now let's talk about, so where does practical pronunciation fall? So as I mentioned before, this is a question that I had to answer, and I talk about this in the introduction to my book. So practical pronunciation is written for C1 learners. And more of my experience is working with advanced learners, learners at the C1 level. More of my experience is working with teaching pronunciation to graduate students in the United States at research universities. I've worked with international teaching assistants. So they are teaching courses to undergraduate students. I've worked with medical researchers who are going to international conferences and they are presenting on their research. They were bringing me words that I had never seen before. It was a real challenge for me and I loved this. So this level of language that they were bringing me was really high. And so for practical pronunciation, I really had to bring up the level of language that's in the book. And you will see that reflected in the book because the language level, the level of language of learners that I've worked with is just so high. And you will see that reflected in practical pronunciation. And I've also worked a lot with business professionals. So MBAs, pre-MBAs, people in MBA programs. It was another population that I worked with. So with that, if you're working with B2 level learners, a question would be, would practical pronunciation be a good book for your learners? I would say with some scaffolding, you may be able to use the book. I will caution that it will be challenging in terms of the language that's there. So I'm going to be honest that there's not a dumbing down of that. Now, by the same token, if you are someone who works with lower level learners, so A1, A2, B1 learners, as a teacher, there are many valuable approaches to teaching pronunciation that you will be able to apply across from multiple learners at all different levels. But as a book, as a whole, practical pronunciation is definitely developed for advanced learners and definitely at that C1 level. Another factor I want to talk about is age. So if you've taken a course on second language acquisition, you've probably read about the critical age hypothesis or the critical period. Depending on the author, it can be called a few different things. But the basic idea is that first language acquisition, or this more natural language acquisition process, is easier before puberty, and then after that, it becomes more difficult. So when it comes to pronunciation, this is more often cited that it is easier to do before puberty, and that after that, it becomes more difficult. And so you will often hear that when children are learning a new language or a second language, people will say that they don't have an accent, and that when adults learn it, that they do have an accent. Now, of course, everyone has an accent, and I will do another video that's on that, this concept of accent, and what do we mean when we say that someone has an accent, and that's a discourse. But again, that's a whole other issue that's there. So, but for this video, I'm going to focus on teaching adults, because practical pronunciation is written for adults. And as I mentioned earlier, in terms of level, this is written for C1 level learners, and so that's the audience. So what I found is that working with adults, so especially with educated adults, is that they like having some rules and some explanations. And so you're going to find some of that in practical pronunciation. And I want to talk about that, of what I found with working with adult learners and the language acquisition process, and also pulling from my own language learning experiences of learning both Spanish and Catalan. And I've learned some other languages, but it's really Spanish and Catalan where I spent a lot of time learning those languages and becoming a very proficient speaker of both of those languages. So with pronunciation, if we go back several decades, there's the audiolingual method approach. And with audiolingual method, there is this listen and repeat approach, which is coming from behaviorism, where we're looking at this habit formation. And there definitely is this listen and repeat that we do in pronunciation training. I think it would be hard to do pronunciation instruction without some form of listen and repeat. Now, that being said, if all of your pronunciation instruction is listen and repeat, then I think we need to have some discussions, because there's so much more to pronunciation instruction than listen and repeat. And I think after you hear what I'm going to talk about, you'll understand why. So here's what I want to talk about is I kind of want to put this out there of kind of taking a triangular approach. So kind of hear me out of this. So let's take a look at this, where let's take this triangle. So we'll do this triangle, and so on one side, let's go ahead and let's have this old school approach with the listen and repeat approach. And you will find that in practical pronunciation. So there are 210 audio files. There are also some video files. The video files really don't focus on listen and repeat. A few of them do, but it's really the audio files that are going to focus on the opportunities to listen and give you opportunities for that listen and repeat. Now, this next corner in this triangle that I want to talk about is this focus on rules or explanations, and really what I want to call more tendencies. So in practical pronunciation, you'll notice that I use this verb tends, so tends to, because at the end of the day, a lot of rules are meant to be broken. And when it comes to pronunciation, a lot of these rules that we have, they are broken. And when we break them, it means something new. And that's what I find really exciting about pronunciation, is when we break these rules, what does that mean? What does the speaker mean when we break those rules? So we've got this listen and repeat, and then we've got these rules. And I do find that adult learners, especially my educated adult learners. They love these rules, these analytical learners. So we've got this kind of mimicry, this behaviorism. We're also working on the muscles in our mouth, and we're just kind of practicing. And then we've got this where our minds are kind of analyzing. And then I see this other part up here, which is this building of intuition. And so what's happening here is we're really listening to as many different examples as we can of different speakers. And then we're testing our own pronunciation. And we're listening to see, does this sound right? And kind of forming our own hypotheses of does this sound right? So I did this a lot when I was practicing Spanish and practicing Catalan, to where I got to the point where I would just kind of listen to something and I was like, yeah, that sounds right, or no, that doesn't sound right. And I know I'm not a native speaker of Spanish or Catalan, but I know when something sounds right or when something sounds wrong. And it just got to a point where it was just that intuition. And so that's part of the goal, is working through this listen and repeat and different rules and through different activities. And what you're going to find through practical pronunciation is a lot of opportunities to go outside of the book and to be listening to other speakers and listening on Youglish and listening to different lectures on YouTube and listening to speakers on TED Talks, so that you're really listening to other people. And then you're building more of that intuition that goes outside of the listen and repeat and following these rules. So that's what we're doing for adult learners. And that's really something that for adult learners that is needed. And so this, for me, for adult learners, I don't think that we can have an effective class without all of these. The last topic I want to talk about is language background. So understanding what language or languages our learners speak can really help us when we are teaching pronunciation. And I want to highlight two different resources that I've used over the years. So one of them is this book that's called Learner English. So this is an old classic, and I've got two copies of it here. And I'm going to hold them up, and I want you to see. One of them is thicker than the other. Let's see if we can kind of get them, and you can kind of see one is thicker than the other. So this one's thinner, this one's thicker. So this is the first edition, and this is the second edition. And I want to show you both of them, because if you're like me, I will often buy used copies of books because I'm often trying to save money. And I did buy the first edition because, I bought this when the first edition was out. And the first edition does not have Korean. And I just wanted to make sure that you know that. And I started out teaching a lot of Korean speakers. And so the second edition does have Korean. So I just want to point that out, is kind of being aware of what is in books, and that as new editions come out, they expand. Also, the second edition has an audio CD, and so there's audio so that you can hear. But what I like about this book, it's not just about pronunciation, but you get information about, so I'm looking here about French speakers, and so it will show you a chart about, here we've got the consonant sounds that are in the French language, and so it will help you understand the language background of your learners. So this is coming from, and so here we've got with Italian, so here we've got the vowel system. So here we're seeing vowels and consonants for Italian speakers. So this is coming from contrastive analysis. So we're basically doing a contrast of the first language of our learners and contrasting it with the sounds that are in in English, which is the target language that we are teaching. So that's just a book that I've enjoyed, that I've used. Now, this is a bit limited in terms of the languages that are listed. So another resource that I want to tell you about, and it is a free resource that is out there, is called omniglot.com. So let me say that again, omniglot.com. So see, even pronunciation instructors can have trouble with pronunciation. So omniglot.com. And this website is basically an encyclopedia of languages. And there are more than 2,000 languages that are on this website. And I'm going to tell you a story about how I learned about this website about 20 years ago. So I was teaching a class, and it was the first day of class, and I had a student come in, and he put down on the desk a printout from Omniglot for the language Telugu. And he assumed that I had never heard of, and I knew nothing about the language Telugu. And he was actually correct. I knew nothing about the language Telugu. And this student had the agency to help me as a teacher, to give me information about his language so that I could be a better teacher. And I just loved this, that here's a student telling me, I want to learn from you, but I also recognize that you probably don't know about my language, and I'm going to empower you. I want to empower you as a teacher with more knowledge about my language so that you can help me and empower me as a student. So in this video, what I want to do is empower you as teachers with knowledge so that you can empower your learners. So this empowerment is coming from one of my learners with omniglot.com. So with Telugu, so just reading from, I've got the website pulled up here. Telugu is a Dravidian language spoken mainly in the southeastern state of Andhra Pradesh and Telangana, where there are about 70.6 million speakers. So there are a lot of people who speak this language. And then as you go through in this, so it has information about the written alphabet. So it shows you the different vowel sounds. It has the different consonant sounds. What I also really like about this website is it has different recordings. Let me see, I'm going to go ahead and play this, and you might be able to hear it through the microphone. So there you can hear a recording of Telugu being spoken, and there are different YouTube videos that it will link to. There are a ton of different links that are here. So for each of the different languages, you will find that. So while books like Learner English are going to be good for some of these languages that you're going to come across over and over and over again. So your Spanish speakers, your Arabic speakers, your Korean speakers, Japanese speakers. When you come to, across many other languages, you're not going to find it in a book like Learner English because, the book would be way too wide. And so we need to go to something like omniglot.com. Now, with that, I also want to point out that it's important as we get to know our learners that we get to know if they know more than one language. And I want to put that out there, such as, so let's take, you've got two different Spanish speakers. So let's say you've got two Spanish speakers and they're both from Spain. And one is from Madrid and one is from Barcelona. So this is going to be important to know because your Spanish speaker from Madrid may only speak Spanish, and your Spanish speaker from Barcelona may be bilingual with Spanish and Catalan. Now for pronunciation, this is going to make a huge difference, a huge difference. Knowing this and having this knowledge and doing some background. Because there are consonant sounds that are in Catalan with sh, j, ch, that you're not going to be getting in. So you're going to get all the sh, ja, ch, so sh, ja, ch, and ja. So all four of those sounds you will get in Catalan. In Spanish, you will get ch. And so knowing that and having that knowledge of multiple languages that your learners speak will be important. Also, let's take a look at, so let's say that we've got Spanish speakers, you've got 2 Spanish speakers from Uruguay. And you've got one speaker that is from the south, from Montevideo, and another speaker is from Rivera. That's right by the Brazilian border. So the Spanish speaker who is from Montevideo is going to say Montevideo, or they will say the name of the city Rivera is Rivera, with Rivera, but the one who is from close to the border will say Rivera, with a v sound. They will have a V sound as part of their phonological system. And I learned this because I spent 2 weeks in that community speaking Spanish and not being understood because I didn't use the V sound when speaking Spanish. And so sometimes when we learn more about not only languages that are spoken, but then also different dialects and varieties, they can help us out. So these are things that get into language background that makes teaching pronunciation a lot more interesting. So those are just some interesting random things that I'll share about language background, and also helps you learn a little bit more about my linguistic background and all of that. Thank you. Thank you for watching this video. If you could like and subscribe so that you know when new videos are coming out. And please tell other teachers about this YouTube channel. There will be more content coming out. And in the comments, please ask questions and let me know what ideas you have for new videos. I've got a list of ideas, but I will run out at some point, and I'd like to know what you are interested in. Thanks.